Hi there guys, and welcome to another edition of the Cover Zero show with me, your host Simon Conboy. Draft weekend has come and gone, so got a whole bunch of new players in the NFL. This week I'm going to be spending most of my shows doing reviews of each individual team. Going to be organising the episodes by division. This episode of course focusing on the AFC North. So really thought the draft was very entertaining this year. Personally, a lot of trades, in the first two rounds in particular. Some real surprises in there. Really made it a lot easier to watch than it sometimes is, especially in UK, watching it from 1 till about 4:30, 5 in the morning. It can be a bit of a slog sometimes, but this year really didn't let up. So what I'll be doing for this is just going through each individual team, each pick they made, and just sort of giving my thoughts on how they performed in the draft and essentially whether I thought they did a good job or not. So we'll begin with the team that had the first overall pick in the NFL draft, the Cleveland Browns, who certainly didn't surprise anybody with their first overall selection, Myles Garrett, the defensive end from Texas A&M. Consensus first overall pick, it seemed. Simple fact, I think positional value defensive end is right up there. This isn't the kind of prospect that comes along that often. If they do, you're only going to be able to get them high. His physical tool set blew up the combine. Julius Peppers-esque type freak athlete with production that maybe doesn't quite match the skill set, but was certainly very productive in college. Anything else would have felt like the wrong decision, especially a quarterback would have felt like huge reach. So no critique of the Browns here, gives them a franchise cornerstone on the defensive side of the ball. I expect he should be a really good player if he can match his abilities to the physical tools that he's got. And then traded back the 12th pick, which I thought was a fairly savvy move. This roster's still got a ton of holes. With the 25th pick, they selected one of my favourite players in the entire draft. So they've got another first rounder from Houston next year in exchange for this. And they selected Jabril Peppers, the safety from Michigan. I think this is a real solid pick. They needed to bring some excitement. I think he could potentially line up, as a backer in or a corner, nickel corner in sub packages. I think he's gonna need to develop sort of deep coverage skills, I think, before he becomes a very effective safety. But I think he becomes a very interesting chess piece for them immediately. Can potentially give them some help on special teams. I think considering where they ended up selecting him, managing to pick up that first rounder next season as well, I think this is a really solid selection. Perhaps could have went with a more traditional safety. I do feel there may have been better options on the board, but I won't grade him down too much for this. This player, I think, could really excite the fan base in years to come, and if he develops, I think he's certainly got more upside than some of the safeties that were taken afterwards. So I think it's a solid pick. Not quite a stunner though. I think there were safeties I personally preferred on the board, as much as I love Peppers as a prospect. Then traded back up into the first round, trading for the Packers pick to select David Njoku, the tight end from Miami. There was some talk on the broadcast that perhaps the Steelers were looking at him. So if that is the case, that makes this an even better move. I think Njoku, you can see it on the tape, he looks a lot more like a wide receiver than a tight end. A fantastic skill set. Potentially, could be a Jordan Reed type player. Might take a while to get there, but I don't think that's necessarily a problem for this franchise. Even with what I think has been a pretty good draft overall for them, I don't think they're going to be making too much noise next season. Njoku, and similarly with Peppers, I think these are both players that will really bloom perhaps in their second or third seasons. I'm not sure they'll necessarily have the most impact during their rookie years, particularly on such a struggling roster. But Njoku's receiving capabilities are off the charts. Ability to run, his quickness and his hands, he really does look like a very natural receiver for the tight end spot. Could be a real weapon for them down the line, and I'm sure they'll be grateful that he's not in Pittsburgh, where I think he'd have been incredibly dangerous as part of that receiving receiving core. And the second round, with the 52nd pick, they selected Deshaun Kaiser, the QB from Notre Dame. I said before the draft, I felt Kaiser's probably the most ready, I think, to step in and start day one of the rookie QBs, or the hyped rookie QBs this year. And he looks the most like an NFL quarterback on tape. Not a huge fan of his. The only quarterback I felt was really worth a first rounder did go in the first round in the end. But considering that the Browns waited, they've got themselves another option for next year. I don't know if he's going to be their long-term guy, but it's a mid-second round pick at the end of the day. They don't need to. It's not going to be that same level of pressure like with Mitch Trubisky in Chicago now. That has to go correct. It absolutely does. Whereas for this front office, this pick, it's not critical to the franchise that this is correct. I think there's a pretty reasonable chance that he'll be if not the opening day starter, the starter at some point, because I would suspect, if they start Kessler or possibly Brock Osweiler, there's a perfectly good chance that they'll struggle with the lack of talent around them, and they'll want to see what they've got in Kaiser. He's certainly got the physical tools to be a decent NFL starter. I think a reasonable selection. I understand why they've done it. Perhaps I would have liked to have seen them just maybe roll with the Kessler-Osweiler combination, pick up another good player at this spot, maybe a wide receiver. I still feel this team had a lot of needs, but I can't be too critical, and considering what some teams did at the QB spot this weekend, I think this one's certainly not too bad a move. In the third, defensive tackle, I was pretty high on, to be honest. I think really good value with this selection. Larry Ogunboji, DT from Charlotte. Definitely needed some help against the run. Him and Danny Shelton could potentially be a pretty tough combination up the middle to run on. Best case scenario, maybe they'll be like a poor man's version of what the Giants had last year with Hankins and Damon Harrison. I don't think that'll be the case this year, but it's a good pickup at this point. I think this was a weak class for the defensive tackle group, but I think they got one of the better guys who could potentially make an impact this season. Definitely needed to get better in the trenches. I think this is a reasonable value that met a need, so a real solid start to the third round for the Browns. Beyond that, Howard Wilson, cornerback from Houston. I've not seen too much of his tape. It looks like a corner. I'll give him that. From what I have seen, decent numbers. From what I've managed to find out on him, apparently not a huge amount of experience, but it's a need pick. Can't complain in terms of upside. You can see the upside there for a player picked at this juncture in the draft. Could maybe, if he develops into anything, once we're got to this stage of the draft, I think any kind of contribution you can get is wonderful. As my franchise and draft review series kind of demonstrated, they needed a corner. They got one. We'll see what happens there. Roderick Johnson, the offense tackle from Florida State. I'm a Florida State fan myself, so really struggled last year. I can see why he was such a low pick in the end. It was a poor class. I wouldn't, to be honest, expect too much from him. Getting Caleb Brantley, this is one of those players that I spoke about a lot in the lead up to the draft, because the talent is certainly there, but with the impending legal issues, frankly, I'll be surprised if he's not cut. To be honest, they might get lucky. He might turn him. There might not be too many repercussions for that. Hopefully, the situation isn't too bad. If he can ever hit an NFL field, he was great value, but I suspect this pick will basically be wasted. And then a kicker. Not particularly familiar with the kicker, so I don't really watch too much kick tape. From what I've managed to read, apparently he's a very good kicker, so there we go. They may have a really good kicker. If so, good, I guess. And Matt Day's a running back from NC State. I watched a little bit of tape on him. I can't see him being an every down back, but it's another body. Whether he can maybe become a contributing third down back for them, we'll see. Overall, really quite like what the Browns have done this year. I think they did a really solid job in the first round. I think things sort of fell off a little after that. For me, like the Ogunboji pick, the team certainly got a lot more talent on it. As I say, I think this is going to be a slow burn type of draft. I don't think it's going to have a massive impact on the team's record next year. A rookie safety, a rookie tight end, and a rookie defensive end aren't going to shift your franchise's fortunes in year one. If Kaiser is the one sort of wild card in terms of this draft having an immediate impact, I wouldn't necessarily expect that to be the case, especially in such a competitive division and with such a poor roster around him. If he can develop for them into a competent starter, then they've got great value in round 2, and then this draft could truly look stellar. But my opinion, a rock solid draft. If maybe unspectacular in the end, but won't be too harsh on the Browns here. They managed to pick up a first rounder for next year as well, so they remain loaded heading into a class that's considered to be very good looking when it comes to the quarterbacks next season. So definitely expect them to pull the trigger there. By then the roster should look, they've got a great O-line now. They've got some pieces on the defense. It will just be a case of seeing how they all come together, I think. Would like to have seen him get Reuben Foster rather than Njoku, though, to be honest. I think that's the kind of player that could have really had a massive impact on the defence next season. Getting those 3 starts would have helped all 3 levels. But other than that, I still think I liked Njoku. I like that pick, so I won't be too critical. So the Browns definitely got better. As I say, give them a couple of years, and I think we'll be in a better position to judge what work they've done in particular. So we'll move on to the Baltimore Ravens, who were selecting slap bang in the middle of the round. To the surprise of no one, Ozzie Newsome going back to the Alabama well with the 16th pick, picking up Marlon Humphrey. One of my mates sent me a text when they were on the clock saying that Ozzie must have a diamond cutter on, having 4 Alabama players to choose from at that juncture, all of which would have been reasonable picks actually. Humphrey was probably the one I was least expecting. Actually, I wasn't really expecting Reuben Foster, but I think it's a solid pick. A lot higher on Humphrey than a lot of people are. The knock being a lack of ball skills. I think it's something that can be slow to develop. We've seen that with players before, think like Sean Smith, who showed very little ball awareness and a total inability to catch when he was first in the league. But it can come with time, and at the end of the day, if you're not getting beat, and he's a solid tackler, I think he's a good player. It helps his position need. I think it's a rock solid pick. I think it more likely would have been Conley were it not for the legal issues there. It does seem like most people had him as a higher rated prospect. But I think it's a solid pick. I would like to have seen them go with a pass rusher at this point, even though I do think they've done a great job addressing that later in the draft. So things did kind of work out. I was critical of that at the time. In the end, I think this is a perfectly reasonable pick. Not super exciting, but it fits a need. It's a solid player. I think he'll be a good one down the line. In the second round, pick 47, Tyus Bowser, the outside backer. I guess he'll play D-end from Houston. He's one of the guys that was sort of flying up draft boards towards the end of the season. Not sure if he'll be able to step in and help immediately from his tape. His tape isn't enormously impressive to me, but I think he certainly looks like a player, that looks like an NFL player, and you can't necessarily say that about a lot of pass rushers that are coming out. A lot of them, they look undersized, and you do have to wait and see how they physically develop. But this looks like a guy who can absolutely step in and contribute physically. Don't necessarily see the skill set at this point, but I think considering where they selected him, it's pretty good value, very high upside, definitely fits a need. So this is a really, really solid pick. Similarly, with Chris Wormley, this is a guy I had going in the second round. with the 74th pick. After losing Timmy Jernigan, this team needed to definitely build up the trenches. I'm not sure he's necessarily going to be a superstar type player for them, but I think he's a solid player. Help them a lot against the run, where they did have issues at times last year. Even though their defensive rating ended up very good, I think Jernigan was a big loss. He got sick of his inconsistency. I think this is a player that will very much be the opposite, where he may not necessarily have the flash that Jernigan had, but he'll certainly solidify things, give them a more consistent player, and I think he was great value where they got him. And then just 4 picks later, Tim Williams, another Alabama prospect, of course. Off the field issues are the reason this guy fell here, otherwise he'd probably been a late first, maybe an early second from what I've been able to gather. This is a guy who could, assuming they keep him on the straight and narrow, develop into a really, really good pass rusher. His tape, you compare it to Bowser, you can see this is a more refined prospect, better technique, and not often the sort of skill set that you'll see in a guy selected at this point. Pass rushers of this caliber tend not to fall this far unless there are these kind of issues. Of course, I think if you're Baltimore, you're thinking best case scenario, this ends up being like a Justin Houston situation. He ends up being a real steal. Often these moves don't work out, but I can definitely understand the logic to it. If one of these rushers works out for Baltimore, either Bowser or Williams, I don't think it's likely both do. If both do, then brilliant. They've nailed this draft. If one of them can work out in the long run and get some contribution next year, then good job there. One of my favourite picks in the draft, Nico Siragusa at pick 122. I think I had him going in the 3rd round or late 2nd. I think he's a really good player. I know the line class was not great, but I do think there were some perfectly reasonable guards in this draft. I think he'll step in day one and improve that line. I think him and Yanda have the potential to be a really, really good tandem. I think this was an absolute home run pick, so they've done a great job there. They've gone with another guard, Jermaine Illuminor from Texas A&M. May have said that incorrectly. This is an upside pick. Tested really well, a really good athlete, even if the tape isn't necessarily great. Who knows? With these kind of things, it comes down often to coaching and whether the guy takes the coaching and has the ability. We'll see what happens down the line with that. Maybe not expect too much from this one. And then Chuck Clark, I know nothing about this guy, Virginia Tech defensive back. I guess he'll play special teams for him and probably not see the field, barring a rash of injuries. In terms of the Ravens draft, I think it's solid. I would have liked to have seen them try and get a playmaker at some point. I still think when you look at this team on offense, they don't look particularly threatening. Flacco is just fine. He's not got a great crew there. I mean, I like the selections they've made. I think defensively, they did need to attack the line in particular. Getting a corner in the 1st round also makes a lot of sense. There was a definite need there. It does feel like they've made an active decision. They want to get better on defense. They clearly have made that decision, and I think they've definitely achieved that, particularly with regards to the pass rush, which was losing Doomerville. Terrell Suggs is getting older. Definitely needed that injection of youth and talent, but I just fear that offense is just going to be once again middle of the pack at best. But other than that, like the picks they've made are good. I just would have loved to have seen a running back or a receiver at some point in this draft, especially considering how good the running back group was. But I like most Baltimore fans, in Ozzie, they trust. He's done a great job in his time there, so I'll give him the benefit of the doubt. Decent draft, not huge. Again, I would have really loved it if they'd got one of those, but it's solid. that's where I'll go. I'll hedge my bets on this one. I'll be pretty conservative. As I say, if they can get 2 good pass rushes out of this, then that's what will elevate it for myself. Moving on to the Cincinnati Bengals. This is a team I've got on record as saying, and I don't think I'm hardly Nostradamus for this. This team's really suffered from those last 2 off seasons. Was one of the most talented rosters in the league, and most of those players were obtained through drafting. They let a few too many go. So there's a lot of work, I think, to be done to overhaul the Steelers in this division next season. Number 9 pick, they decided to get AJ Green some much needed help. They went for the speedster John Ross. One of the big surprises of the draft, for me, and I'm sure for a lot of people, was how the 3 top receivers just all flew off the board in the top 10. Ross gives them something, an interesting problem, because I've seen Andy Dalton underthrow AJ Green ever since they both got to Cincy. So here's another guy he can perhaps underthrow deep. And man, this guy will be easy to underthrow. But definitely fits a need. AJ Green and Eifert are great, but Eifert's had some injury issues. AJ Green, as great as he is, it always helps to have someone else take some of the load off. And Sanu and Jones did a good job of that when they were there. It makes this offense a lot more explosive. Whether he can stay healthy, how much he'll be able to contribute in year 1, I'm not so sure. But I'm not a huge fan of the pick. I think there were some better prospects on the board. I would have liked to have seen Jonathan Allen at this point. Possibly Reuben Foster, although clearly, based on where he fell, maybe not. I don't know too much. Obviously, I don't know about these shoulder issues. Even a defensive end, I think Barnett would have been a great fit here. I understand why they've gone with the receiver. They're thinking, I think this feels like a short-term pick for me, trying to get back to the playoffs as soon as possible. Doesn't really fit the MO of what the Bengals have done in the draft. I feel like this is a bit of a reach. We'll see how it goes. Not a huge fan of this pick, though, if I'm entirely honest. A pick I think a lot of people saw coming. Has Bengals written all over it, selecting Joe Mixon with a 48th overall selection, running back from Oklahoma. Legal issues, I've said many times in my draft previews. Mixon was first round talent, sunk by off the field issues. Figured he'd go in round 2, and frankly the fact the Bengals are the team who decided to pull the trigger is one of the least surprising things that could have occurred. However, on the field, he's dynamite. I'm sure this probably spells the end of Jeremy Hill's time with the team, or it could very easily do so. I still think Gio Bernard will be the 3rd down back there. I think that's got the potential to be a very, very good combination. Again, this says to me this is a team looking to try and improve this offense and win now. Try and maybe save Marvin Lewis's job by finally winning a playoff game. Yeah, if he keeps his nose clean, this could end up being one of the steals of the draft. But of course, most people will understand why he fell where he did. We'll see what happens. But this is a real solid pick in terms of the player they got and the need there, as Jeremy Hill has been very much underwhelming the past 2 seasons, and Gio Bernard not an every down back. The 3rd, love this pick. This is more like the Bengals that I've been accustomed to the last few years. Jordan Willis, I think he's got a lot of upside as a pass rusher. Best case scenario, it kind of reminded me of Justin Houston a little bit coming out of college. They needed a pass rusher bad. I think this guy could step in day one. I wouldn't want him playing against the run too much, but I think he'll give them an effective situational pass rusher. Desperately need one. They've got Carlos Dunlap and not much else in terms of outside pass rush. Grand scheme of things, long run, I think he could develop into being a really good player, a double-digit sack kind of guy. So I have real good value with the 73rd pick. Love this pick by the Bengals. Then similarly, getting Cole Lawson at 116. I think this is a guy who's been sunk by injuries. I think he fell further than I expected. I could easily have seen him going in round 2. So, yeah, this was just a value. Again, it's a need. They've got 2 guys now to attack that need. Fantastic selection. And really, my early critique of the John Ross pick looks slightly worse when they've attacked 2 of them other needs. Still think they need linebacker help. Pretty bad though. Josh Malone, wide receiver from Tennessee. I think this is a real solid pickup. Possession type receiver. What they'll do with him, I'm not so sure. That's my only sort of question. Hopefully they'll move John Ross around. I'm not sure this is a guy that you necessarily want to move around too much. But I think he's got a chance to step in and play for sure, considering the lack of depth at wide receiver on the roster. I think it's a solid pick. I think there were better options on the board though. Now we're getting into the... Alright, I did say they needed a DT. Ryan Glasgow, DT from Michigan. Not particularly familiar with him. They needed one. So I'd expect with Pico being gone, you'd have to expect he'll be in part of the rotation. From what I've managed to find out, did some pretty good numbers. Was pretty good at Michigan, so that's all positive. See what happens there. And then with a kicker in the 5th, that seems high to me. I mean, that's which and I get real sore about kickers being taken too highly. So they did need one, I guess. So if he's good with kickers, it's a simple case. Wait and see. It'll be a solid pick if he's one of them 90+% kickers. Selected a guard, JJ Dillman from Utah. They definitely needed a guard. This is one where I will defer to the Bengals' ability to develop offensive linemen. It has been very, very good in the last decade. So there's certainly a possibility this is someone who can step in and contribute at some point. Whether it will be this year, I'm not so sure. Jordan Evans, a linebacker. From what I've been able to gather, not necessarily a great player at this point, but really good athlete. Again, they'll have an opportunity to coach him up. They definitely needed some more athleticism in that regard. Another player I'm not particularly familiar with. Brandon Wilson, corner from Houston. Can always do more corners. Seems like a reasonable pick. And Mason Schreck, great name, tight end from Buffalo. Not sure why they'd necessarily need a tight end. Maybe it's especially considering apparently he's a receiving tight end. So I don't know, maybe some backup insurance for Tyler Eifert. So all in all, beyond, I don't like the John Ross pick. Pretty happy with the rest of this draft though, if I'm a Bengals fan. And it's got the potential to get real ugly, I think. There's a chance John Ross, injury problems, Cole Lawson, injury problems, mixing off the field problems. So I think it's risky in terms of trying to immediately upgrade this offense. They've definitely done a good job. Tried to improve that pass rush. As I say, I would have liked this draft so much more if you replaced John Ross with maybe John Allen. Then I'd say they've nailed it. That front 7 would all of a sudden, or front 4 would all of a sudden be looking great. A lot of this will hinge on those first 2 players. If they can step in, get this team back to the playoffs, then they'll be seen as a great draft. I'm dubious about that being the case. I really love the Willis and Lawson picks, and I can understand the Mixon one, but I'm a little bit dubious on this one. So I'm going to edge towards not liking this draft, but I can certainly understand it and see the upside that is attached. Which is, normally I'm a big fan of the Bengals drafts. This one, not so much. But I think offensively, they should be better, and they have to be. If they're not, then this draft has been a failure for them. Moving on to the Steelers, one of the best drafting teams in the NFL, as my franchise and draft review series demonstrated. This is a team that always does a pretty damn good job. And in the first round, to the surprise of absolutely no one, they went with an outside linebacker because that's kind of what they do very often. Drafted TJ Watt. I think this is perfectly reasonable. It was the kind of range I had him going in. I think he's a pretty good player. I don't think he's as good a player as his skill set at this point in time, but this is a team that's done such a good job of developing young players. Probably my favourite rusher that was on the board at that point. Although I actually really think I would have liked to have seen them get Jordan Willis, and considering how far he fell from this spot, maybe getting him in round 2 would have been more to my liking. But considering who was on the board, I think this was a really good pick. If he can, develop like his brother did, then it will be the steal of the draft. But definitely needed to get someone. James Harrison, of course, can't keep going forever, I wouldn't think, as much as he looks like he's going to try. I think Harrison should, in theory, be good for another year, gives a bit more time to develop. And solid pick, unspectacular, but fine, no problems here. Juju Smith-Schuster at 62, this one I'm a little iffy on. I understand what Schuster's highly regarded in this class because he's got that kind of size, power receiver type build, and there weren't a huge amount of them, but I really did not like his tape. Feels like a Martavis Bryant backup, like just in case something goes wrong there, because I feel like they could have done with maybe someone like Cooper Kupp or Chris Godwin, some more of a speed inside type guy. Could have sort of maybe had them and Antonio Brown moving around a lot while Martavis Bryant lines up outside. So it's fine. I do feel like they needed to bring in another receiver. It does feel like Antonio Brown and a load of unreliable options. Martavis Bryant can certainly play, but of course with his off-the-field problems, I don't think you can rely on him. So I like the decision to go receiver. I just feel there were better options there, but it's still a perfectly reasonable pick. Cam Sutton, DB from Tennessee. I think that's a perfectly reasonable pick. I figured they were going to go corner at some point. I was mocking them at corner in round 1 often. Tape not particularly impressive, but at this juncture in the draft, late 3rd round, it's about coaching them up, and we'll see what can happen there. But in terms of need and the range most people had him falling into, it seems like this was a solid pick. Big fan of the James Conner pick. Definitely feel this team needed another running back. I think this is the type of back that can provide a perfect contrast to what Lev Bell does. I think he's going to be a really, really good player for them. Lev Bell, of course, does have a bit of an injury history and is one incident away from being suspended for a while. But this is a really solid player. Surprised maybe he was available at this juncture, but we'll see what happens. If he can stay healthy, of course, had cancer, so we'll see what happens there. Hope the best for this kid, really do. Then pick I love, because just Landry Jones is not good in my opinion, and Roethlisberger will get injured from time to time, so brought in Joshua Dobbs, the QB from Tennessee. I like his tape a lot more than most of the QBs in this draft. The physical skill set is, I think the reason that he's, down, way down the rounds. Maybe not, an ideal start, but I think a real solid. And this is the kind of player I can see as like a career backup, because he looks like a quarterback, just one with a fairly, at below average arm, to say the least. So this is a real solid pick at this juncture. Good job for realising that your current backup is not good enough. Next up, we've got Brian Allen, cornerback from Utah. Not particularly familiar with this guy, but I saw, you see the numbers. Athletically, this is a gifted player. Again, see if they can coach him up. 2 corners, if one of them pans out, this is great. Then a long snapper. I don't know what to even say about that. I'm not sure why you draft a long snapper necessarily, but whatever, I guess. And then Keon Adams. I've seen a little bit of his tape. I think this is a pretty reasonable pick. This is a guy I could see certainly making a contribution if there's some injuries, and we'll see what happens. 7th rounder, who knows. All in all, not the most exciting draft in my opinion from the Steelers, but I think it's a smart draft in terms of attacking clear needs, backup QB. I think pass rusher corner and wide receiver all stood out as positions that needed to be addressed. I think they've there's a clear effort to do so. The Smith-Schuster pick jumps out to me as the one that could have the most impact next season. Certainly going to be a spot open, I think, behind those first two receivers. If the Connor one works out, I think this could end up being a really, really good draft for them. And if they can get some contributions in the defensive backfield, it would be great. Again, TJ Watt, Smith-Schuster, I think those are the two who will have an opportunity to see the field early and often. So in terms of next year, they'll be the players to judge. But I think long term, this could be a good draft. Short term, I think it might be a bit tough. And the Steelers do often tend to bring along their draft picks quite slowly. Not a stunning draft, but I like this draft. So, yeah, good job there, Steelers. If I was to have to, and I don't have to, it's the first one these videos done, so I decided I'm going to put an order on these. So I think my favourite of these drafts was probably the Browns, which certainly sounds odd to say. Probably say they had the strongest for me. Then the Steelers, I think theirs was just perfectly sound. We'll then go with the Ravens and then the Bengals. I think the Ravens, as I said earlier, would love to see a bit more offense from them. I think the Bengals one is all upside, but a lot of risk attached to it. So it could certainly end up being the best one after a season. But yeah, and the Browns should be rating high considering how many picks they had and where those picks were located. So yeah, they should be jumping out as having an impressive draft. So let me know what you guys think. Any of these picks that you were particularly aggrieved by or you agree with me on, let me know, whether it's the comment section below. Find us on Facebook at Cover Zero. Find me on Twitter at Simon Conboy. I'll do my absolute best to get in touch with each and every person who makes contact. Always fun to chat some ball. It's been a pleasure as always. Check out more of the videos if you enjoyed this one. Have all of the divisions done by the end of the week. Also, my top 100 airs tonight, so I'm going to be revealing my picks 100 through 91. Hopefully they'll be up before that airs. And I'm going to be critiquing that as well because I often hate that list. So thanks for checking it out. Like, share, subscribe, check out the Patreon, all that good stuff. Thank you for your time. Pleasure as always. Go Bucks.